Hi everyone, welcome back to this video, and in this video I would be giving you some information on Agile Invest. Okay, so this is the video for all the business analyst folks out there, so I hope this is informative to you. So let's get into it. So invest. So in Agile, invest, it's an acronym that is used to assess the standard of a user story. So all of us, we would have been, writing user stories, but how do we know that our user stories are up to the mark and it's providing value to customers? So it's through this invest concept that you're able to compare your user story with these criterias and understand if your user stories are up to a good standard or not. So now let's get see what is this invest. So the first um, criteria. So I in invest stands for independent. So a user story has to be as independent as possible, okay? Unless there are unavoidable dependencies. Now, when you write user stories or when you create user stories, it's always important to keep in mind that the user stories are at utmost independence. So in order to identify if your user stories are independent, or in order to create an independent user story, you need to understand the broader picture of your product or the project you're working in. Only then you would be able to understand the integrities and whatever dependencies exist, and you'll be able to decouple it as possible in a good way. So that's about independence. Always make sure that your user stories are independent and not dependent on multiple factors and other user stories. Of course, there would be maybe some scenarios where there are dependencies, but that's okay. But at the most, try to keep it independent as possible. The next one is negotiable. So user stories, it has to be open to negotiation. Okay, so when you have a user story, when you're entering into an iteration or sprint and then you're planning for it, there would be certain scenarios where the team, the development team, they would give you some ideas, or there might be some other complexities with the user story that would not have been captured. So it's always better, to identify what are these comments that are given, what are the feedbacks given from the development team, and take it into account. So that's very important. So that's what they say, that the user stories need to be negotiable, and also the developers' comments also need to be taken into account. So the user story that a business analyst jots down, it's not always the final one. So sometimes if there are some scenarios where it should be modified a bit based on some dependencies, complexities, etc., it can be it should be modified. Only then you can say that user stories are negotiable. The next one is valuable. So in order to for your user story to be valuable, okay, the user story needs to provide value to the customer. Only then you can say that you're developing a valuable user story. So let's take this example. The transaction table must be updated with new transaction records. So if you look at this user story in detail, ultimately to the end user, it does not provide any value. Okay, it's invaluable. But if you rephrase this, and if you see this user story, as a customer, I should be able to view transactions list so that I can track my transaction history. Definitely a customer wants to view the transaction and his history, which is going to provide value to the customer. So definitely that's a valuable user story. So always make sure that your user stories that you develop, they are valuable enough. And if you see the symptoms, okay, what are the symptoms that you can observe to say that your user story is not providing value? The one is the customers or the business, they do not see any value in the release. So in Agile, you're providing constant releases to customers, but if the customers keep getting some release that actually does not solve their problems or does not ease their pain, then there's no value. You're not providing any value to them, which actually is not part of the Agile manifesto, and you're not following exact Agile methodologies, and you're just developing something that the user or customer is not going to use. So that's something to keep in mind. And the next one is estimable. So the user story must be clear such that the developers can estimate the story. Okay. So of course your user stories need to be estimated by developers, but there are certain times when developers are not able to estimate your user story. So that's going to be a negative symptom of the user story not being estimatable. So in these scenarios, you always have to, again reframe your user story or make things more clearer to the developers so that they'll be able to estimate the user story. So this is about the E. And then you have S, which stands for small. So the user story must be as granular as possible. So take this example. User should be able to add and remove a product to or from the cart. So this is not a very granular user story. So definitely it has to be broken down. So when you break it down, you can break it down as user should be able to add a product to the basket, user should be able to remove a product from the basket. So these two are more granular in level. So here are some symptoms of a user story not being as small as it should be. One is it involves many acceptance criteria. So when you find there's a lot of acceptance criteria that you have with your user story, then there might be some a chance of your user story being too big. And another one is it cannot be completed in a sprint. So if it's going to take a lot of time, then definitely your user story is large and not small enough. So usually user story should be completed in a sprint. It should not exceed. So if you find symptoms of this, then maybe you can identify or you can be sure enough that your user story is not small enough. And the last one, T, stands for testable. So the user story must be testable to verify if it's completed or any bugs exist. So the symptoms of a user story not being testable is, one is there's no way for the quality assurance team to analyze if the developed story is completed. And there might be some scenarios where back end is done, front end is not done, or vice versa. So I've seen scenarios where there are some user stories that are technical and that does not provide any value to the customer. Okay, that's one scenario. And another one is it's either back end functionality or front end functionality, only one is there, and you cannot even test it. If it's going to be an entirely a back end functionality, then there's no means of a front end interface for even the team, quality assurance team or the testing team, to even identify if that user story was done or not. So you should totally avoid scenarios like that and stories like that. If a user story is there in place, make sure that it can be tested, it can be seen by the customers, and something that's not in like a black box and hiding behind the product. So always make sure it's testable. So these were the expansion and definitions of all the INVEST of the acronym INVEST. So whenever you write a user story, try to compare it with this acronym, and if you find there's something that's not right with your user story and does not match, then definitely you have to identify what's wrong and try to modify your user story so you can provide the utmost quality user stories. So if this video was useful to you, please do give this a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do subscribe to this channel, and also do share your feedbacks. Thank you.